And welcome to Small Biz Matters here live in the studios of Triple H 100.1 FM and, of course, across the Community Radio Network Australia. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to a brand new show, a brand new Small Biz Week. Lots happening. Bit of action on the weekend for small business, really, but we're not even going to touch on that because I'm sure you're all sick of hearing about it. Today we're going to talk about what it really takes to start a business. What have you got to be aware of? What have you got to be sure of? Now, lots of you out there are probably thinking, I've already got a business. How is this relevant to me? It absolutely is relevant because I'm sure you can look back and think, there's a couple of things that I could have done better. Or you could be mentoring someone who is going through this phase, and this would be really helpful for you, this particular program. But also you might want to look back and say, there's a couple of things that I could tweak about my business now, which absolutely we could have all done better when we were beginning, but it doesn't. It's always relevant to what we're doing at the moment. Now, I always enjoy meeting and learning with authors because I find that they are so ridiculously knowledgeable about their topic because they've spent months and sometimes years really planning out their books, researching, speaking to the right people, and just like we do here on Small Biz Matters, learning from the experts. They also make it very clear and concise and understandable and often very well digestible as well. Those books that are well formatted, laid out, easy to read, easy to take in. And this is exactly why I've invited Ingrid Thompson, author of So You Want to Start a Business, on the program today. Thank you for joining us, Ingrid.
Thank you, Alexi, and hello, everybody. Good morning.
Now, we've been talking about you coming on the show for quite a while now because we came across each other on LinkedIn, as all do good business relationships do. But I'm really excited because when we met, there was a real, a real passion between the two of us about helping people get things right. Is that what this book's all about? Is that why you did it? Was that where the impetus came from?
Yeah, Alexi, it really did because and that I remember that moment we met and we had that cup of tea and I think we chatted for far longer than we expected.
It was about 3 cups of tea, wasn't it?
I think it was. But, you know, we're both the sort of people that like to plan, we like to be organised, and this book is for that sort of person. You know, there are lots of people who want to wing it or seat of their pants, that kind of thing. And, you know, there's wisdom in the book for them, but they're probably not the sort of person who's going to take the time to plan and think things through. The book is designed for someone who really wants to know that they're setting solid foundations, they're making a good decision when they decide to start a business, whether that's a full-time business, a side hustle, and as you said, whether it's tweaking some of the things that are going on in their own business right now.
And is it a good idea, do you think, what stage do you start a business? Is it because you're vaguely thinking about something and you go, right, fly by the seat of my pants, I'm just going to go for it? Or do you think it takes a little bit more gusto? What do you think's your top tip for really, where do you make that start? When's the first step?
Well, that does depend a little bit on what the business idea is. So if you've got something that is going to be incredibly niche, incredibly new, incredibly different, which is also incredibly risky because, if it's not tried before, there's high risk. But there's some really good examples of some new businesses that have started, they've used influencers to get traction and, it's gone gangbusters right from the beginning. But if you're thinking about something that's really been tried before, so you want to open a flower shop or you want to be a coach or you're an accountant and want to branch out on your own, you could be doing the groundwork for that for a year or two beforehand, really building up your financial resources. You could be, reading business blogs, finding out what it's like to actually run a business, talking to other business owners, listening to podcasts, just finding out what does it really take to get started.
And there's a real wealth of information out there these days, isn't there? And this is why I'm really excited about your book because it feels more complete, a little bit more comprehensive, but also easy to digest because it's very much a step-by-step process. Now, let's talk about reasons why people might get into business. So obviously, someone's in a job, they suddenly kicked out of the job. There's one reason you might go, I think I might not put myself in this position again. What do you find, is there a shift in the way people are beginning businesses, do you think, or is it still just this sort of like smattering of different reasons why?
Well, there are a smattering, as you say, but today more than ever, pretty much everybody wants to start their own business. I was talking to a group of international students yesterday and there's about 75 people in the room and I asked them who imagines that at some stage they're going to start their own business. And I think pretty much everybody put up their hand. And the ones that didn't have probably got that quiet little voice sort of secretly saying maybe. So I think there's a lot of that in pretty much everybody. But there's a few really salient reasons that people start. So as you said, they get turfed out of the corporate world, and so being able to start a business is an option for them. But there's a couple. So family history can be a really solid reason. So somebody grows up in an environment where the family has been in business and they get into business as well. So they've learned what it's like. So they're very realistic about the effort it takes, about the issues of cash flow and the challenges. We know for women, having a second baby is a really big trigger for people starting a business, because the cost of childcare for the second child, if they don't have good other support around them, that cost of childcare for the second child can be more than their wage or their salary that they get, depending on what their job is. So if it's somebody working in an advertising agency or somebody working in an environment where they're doing something, they say, I could do this myself. I get paid this much money. My agency charges this much money to whoever it is. If I had a few of my own clients, which I easily could, then, I could have the flexibility of being with my children when I need to, and I could earn the money as well. So that is one of the triggers. How that reality plays out. And we'll talk about, how tough it can be financially, but that is one of the big triggers. And I think another one that's not talked about much is people wanting to lift the standard of the profession they're in. So maybe they're working in an environment where that they're doing what they're doing, but they're doing it inside a corporate, or they're doing it inside somebody else's business. And maybe they would do things a bit differently if it was their own. So it's a wonderful opportunity to really carve out a customer service level or a professional level that maybe isn't being exhibited in the business.
It's a very interesting topic, isn't it? The thought that people are just trying to make it better for their own industry. And maybe, I suppose that's not a particularly ageist thing. People can consider themselves leaders in the industry at quite a young age as well. And that might be a reason why they start things up. Do you see those sort of people, those sort of personalities not only become their own entrepreneurs, their own businesses, but also go on to be leaders and part of the board of their professional associations? Is it that sort of personality that goes on to do that?
I think it is. And I was hosting along with Bondi a couple of weeks ago, a forum around leadership in the fitness industry. And, we have 65% of the Australian population is obese or inactive. And I think there's a real role for the businesses in the fitness industry to show leadership. So it's as you say, how does that play out in their environment? And I think we're seeing more of that. These people coming together not to grow their own business necessarily, but to grow the commitment to that particular part of the health industry.
And speaking about what you were mentioning before with students, is there in your mind, with people starting businesses, a real shift for the younger generations to see this as an option? And I'll give you an example. I was lucky enough to have an intern with me all day Friday, a young gentleman who is in year 12, and he's doing a pathways program through UTS, very successful, really enjoying himself. He's basically studying to be an entrepreneur, which in my, Gen X brain went, what is that? Like, how does that work? But he explained it to me, and it's a wonderful system and a great way to get them into the industry. But when I said to him, how many jobs do you think you'll have in your life? That sort of topic came up, and he went, I think about 7 or 8. So I think people coming out of school, or as you said, those international students, they see that as one of the options. Do they see it as in your mind the be all and end all? Do they say that's what I'm heading towards, or do they see it as just one of the things that I might muck around with?
I wonder if it's part of that mix. I feel like there's people who are going to have a job here and a bit of a contract there. What do they call that? The blended career? Or
if they do, that's a great works term.
Yeah,
we can coin that right now.
A sort of a side hustle here. And then one of the fellows yesterday in the group that I was talking to said that he imagines he'll have 20 years in the corporate and then he'll start his business. And, there's a lot to be said for, I probably had about 20 years in corporate, and there's a lot to be said for what you learn in a big business. There's all the HR procedures, there's the respect for policies and procedures, and the fact that is what actually keeps things moving along. And the rigidity is so how do we as a small business not allow that level of rigidity to come into us? So that's my sense, is that there's a need for blended because maybe at the beginning they can't make the same amount of money. So there's the sort of working in somebody else's business, and I highly encourage someone who's thinking about starting any particular type of business is go work in that field.
Yeah.
Like if you want to run a flower shop, go work in a flower shop, or go to the markets and just go get your hands into it.
And that's a lot about what you talk about in the book as well, is the need for that experience. You can't just launch yourself into being a florist with, well, not even with just some basic education. You need to have that experience. And I don't think anybody of any generation would argue that not at least having, your foot dipped in the water at some point is any way to start a career. You can't just become a tech giant without studying tech, for example.
Well, I look at some of the people, because I work a lot with fitness professionals or health professionals, and I look at the ones that have really gone on to create a successful business. They've actually got involved in the businesses that they were contracting to. So they've helped out with sending out the newsletter. They've helped out on the front desk. They've helped out with managing the finances. So they start to get some of the business acumen that's not just about being really good at what they do.
So let's talk about the what you need before you start. So we mentioned a little bit about why it is that you might go into a career, if you will, of running your own business, a job that you can step into. So you need to have an interest, obviously. You need to be wanting to do this. Although some people are just thrown in the deep end and just have no choice because of redundancy, or particularly because of the ageism that we have in the workforce, which we're all very familiar with. You need to, as you mentioned, have a certain level of business acumen. So you need to, do your due diligence when it comes to finances and understanding how all that works. I don't think anybody should be starting a business without at least basically understanding what a profit and loss is, or a balance sheet, and what those things mean. Although there's a lot of people in businesses who don't know what those things are. And you need to make sure your finances are in order. So let's talk a little bit about that, because cash flow is obviously one of the biggest issues that small businesses talk about all the time. What do you mean by have your finances in order before you start?
Well, I think there's two aspects to that. It's your personal finances. So truly understanding, firstly, how much it costs you to live. And the number of people I speak to who actually don't know what that number is. And for most people, it's actually less than they think. They're scared to do it because they don't want to see how much it is. But, if you're earning X dollars, do you really need all of that X dollars to live? So if you were to actually pare it back, what could you actually live on? And I remember years ago meeting the people who started Dermalogica, and she was speaking at a conference, and I was fortunate enough to stand beside her in the queue to get a coffee. And they spent no money for 5 years. She had no new shoes. She had no eating out. They absolutely just knuckled down for 5 years to build that business. Now, that's a worldwide business. And, so you can only do that when you know what your absolutely basic money is. So firstly, what is that number for you, and how are you going to earn that? So if you're starting a business, do you keep your job and do that on the side? Do you figure out your costings so you actually can pay yourself that right from the beginning, or at least start paying yourself something? Figuring out how much it's going to cost you to set up. So if you're in an industry that requires a certain amount of financial commitment first, like if we take the florist, you need a fridge to put your flowers in, you need the vases, you need all the collateral that goes with that. You're going to have to sign a lease. A lot of the fitness industry, a lot of health professionals, you have to sign a lease. A lot of the trades, you need to buy equipment. So how much is all that going to cost, and where's that money going to come from? And if you're starting out with a loan, that's a huge, huge commitment. And when we talk about cash flow, that cash has to come from somewhere. So how do you build that into your pricing? So I always say to people, the more you can have paid for when you get started, the better.
Another really great thing to do is perhaps get in with someone who can mentor you in this regard, who would be comfortable showing you what it takes at the beginning, not so much when you're an established business, but at the beginning, what does it cost you to run your business per hour? So a great little exercise is to look at all the overheads that a typical business would have in its first year. You've got the insurance, the rent. Don't look at people yet, because you obviously just got to start on your own. Any equipment you need to buy, stuff you need to set yourself up on, and then divide it by 40, because you only work 40 hours a week, and then divide it by 48 because you only work 48 weeks a year, I should say. And then you get that hourly figure. And if you're not charging that amount to begin with, then you're already starting on the back foot. And the other good thing is to talk about a buffer.
Yes.
I mean, I don't think anyone, regardless of industry, particularly people who've got all those outlays for capital equipment, should start a business without a $10,000 buffer. Just something sitting there. You've got suppliers you need to pay. You're not going to start a business and start working with contractors and be that horrible person that doesn't pay them for 2 months. No, of course you're not. So that's always a good tip as well. But I like what you were saying about understanding what your personal finances are. I mean, so many times, I'm sure you with your background in accounting would have seen, businesses who started off already 3 years behind with their tax and thinking that running a small business is going to get them out of that. It's really, really, really not.
No. And one of the other things that's difficult to understand about business, and it sort of catches people by surprise, is just what you said there about all those costs, is you have to spend money to make money in business. You don't save your way into success. In your personal finances, you save your way into success, or you get a pay rise, or you get a second job, but you actually stop spending financially for yourself. The truth is, in business, if you stop spending, then you kill your business, because you never grow a business by cutting costs. You grow a business by increasing revenue. So that's a big one. The other thing, I think, there's a lot of hidden costs there where you were talking. There's the cost of your website, there's the cost of maintaining your website, there's the cost of having your email, and the software you have to pay.
All those subscriptions. Yeah, subscription creep is a really big issue.
I had a good look at mine recently, and I was just taken away by how much I spend on subscriptions. And I had a good hard look at them, but I need them all. There's WooCommerce to make your website work. There's, all of that.
Indeed. Look, we're going to take a break here on Small Biz Matters, and we'll come back after these community service announcements. We're going to talk a little bit more with Ingrid Thompson about what else you need to really get yourself up and going. You're listening to Triple H 100.1 FM. We'll be back after this. So today we are talking to Ingrid Thompson, and we're talking about how to get started properly, getting it right when you first start. But we're not just talking to those of you out there who are business owners, because, or those people who are starting a business. We're also talking to existing business owners, because I'm sure there's a few tips and tricks you can pick up today. Now, just before the break, we were talking about what it takes to start a business. And we did mention that there are some really great strategies, particularly in and around cash flow, making sure you've got your personal finances in order. It's always a good idea. But let's talk about the people that you need to engage with, Ingrid. What's your top tip on the people that you need to surround yourself with to get the best advice?
Great question, Alexi. And I think, firstly, like-minded people. It's super, super important to find yourself a mastermind group or to get some together with people who are doing what you're doing. And, I was listening to somebody talking recently, and they were saying that there's a huge sort of fear of failure in getting started, or in fact doing anything. And someone who's ahead of you is never going to criticise you. And when we worry about failure, it's because we're worried about what someone thinks of us. And the people who are doing stuff are never going to think, oh, she's failing. They're going to encourage us to move forward. So I really encourage people to hang out with people who are ahead of them. And, it's so, we can have mentors that we've never even met. I have mentors that don't know I exist, but they hold me accountable because I listen to their podcast, I tune into their newsletters, and I think I want to be like them. I want to move along the path the way they have. Maybe not exactly like them, but I'm inspired by that. So, find yourself the people you want to hang out with.
I love that idea of having a mentor that you've never met. I think it's awesome. Very safe as well. So it's all right, because they're not going to judge me because they don't know who I am. But you're very right. It's surrounding yourself with people who inspire you. And that person doesn't necessarily have to sit down and have a structural meeting with you and tell you what to do and make you accountable in terms of, strategies. But they do make you accountable, because you can say, well, that was your journey and I want to be like that. And let me look at where you were at this point in your journey, and maybe I can learn from you.
And learn from that, indeed.
And the other thing that's great is nobody ever says no. When you say, I'd love your advice, or do you think you can give me some feedback on blah? I've never had anybody say no. And most of the time, people are quite happy to sit down over a cup of coffee and get to know you better with that question in mind.
Yeah, it's true. When you ask somebody to help you, people naturally want to help. I posted something on a Facebook group recently, and there's about 150 responses to it, because I was asking them their thoughts about a particular subject. Actually, it was about what they wish they'd known when they were starting a business, and about half of them said a business plan. So we'll come back to that. But who are the real people? So, there's the people that are, surround yourself with like-minded. But in a business, when we start talking about the numbers, I mean, I can almost hear the collective audience's eyes rolling back in their heads because, so many people say I'm not a numbers person, but you actually are numbers people. Numbers is about money. And once you start seeing how to make money and how the money adds up, as you said, a basic understanding of profit and loss and a basic understanding of costing, once people get in touch with that, it doesn't mean they have to do their own bookkeeping. And I highly recommend that if it's not your thing, don't spend hours doing it. I was talking to a client recently. He's got an established business, been in business 10 years, and he was going to have some work done for our coaching call the next morning, but he said, I spent all night last night doing my accounts.
What?
And I said, you did your accounts? What about your bookkeeper? Oh, I don't have a bookkeeper. And, we talked on and it actually got worse because he's actually still using Excel to do and he was getting his BAS done because he had to hand that over to the accountant to finish up. And I said, have you heard of Xero or MYOB or QuickBooks? You're like, oh, he said, yeah, but it's going to be a real effort to switch over to that. And I like to keep my finger on the pulse. This is a man who earns more than $100,000 a month. And he is...
So each of those hours is thousands of dollars. I don't think there's bookkeepers out there that cost that much.
There isn't. But his family, Sunday night, here he is, closeted away. Anyway, so I hear lots of examples of that. So
closet bookkeeping. I like that. I'm going to use that.
He's a closet bookkeeper, but using Excel, if you don't mind, instead of a software. But truly, that is one of the first people to outsource to, is to just take your books. It doesn't have to be expensive. There's really good bookkeepers around that can do your books for you. Sign up for Xero or MYOB or whatever the software is and get this person to do that for you. Still pay attention to your profit and loss. Still pay attention to the numbers that are in those reports. And if you don't understand, get the bookkeeper to explain it to you. Get a coach to explain it. Join a local a BEC or, there's different ways that you can get the help to understand that, to have a good look at your numbers. And I tell you, you'll get excited by them.
Exactly. And once you start learning them and then they start dancing around the page for you, that's when things get really exciting. And I would say as well, just as an add-on to that, if you're looking for a good bookkeeper, please go to a professional association and find someone who's qualified and is part of a member of those professional associations, as you would with an accountant or anyone else. What other people do people need to surround themselves with?
Well, a good lawyer, good accountant. So, having a good accountant sort of goes in hand. And often the accounting firms now have bookkeepers that work with them. If you've got something that you need legal advice with, so if you're setting up a partnership or you're doing products that need IP or trademarking, it's really important to get legal advice for that. And, I hear people say, oh, yes, but that's expensive. That's part of those initial costs we were talking about earlier. And I tell you what, it will be super expensive if you don't.
Yeah.
Down the track, I remember years ago talking to three people who wanted to set up a business together as a partnership, and I had suggested to them that they go and get some legal advice. And someone who was in the group said, gosh, wouldn't that be expensive? But you know what? If those three in partnership have some difficulties or some disagreements or one wants to get out, what happens down the track if they haven't set that up? So super important to have the legal advice. And then there's people to actually do the work for you. If you're I remember going to the markets one time, there was an egg producer selling eggs, and the person who was selling the eggs at the markets, I said, where did the eggs come from? And she said, oh, they come from, and she mentioned the town, but she didn't seem to know very much about them. So if you're going to employ someone to do, then train them, teach them, show them what they need to do for your business. And a virtual assistant, you can get virtual assistants, so that's someone who wants to work in their own time space. I have someone in remote New South Wales who does a lot of the admin stuff for me. Fantastic, proofreads my articles, helps me out with some of the administration. So, it depending on the business, it can be someone who works just a couple of hours a day, a couple of hours a week, or, maybe more than that, but particularly as you get started.
It's a great way to surround yourself with other people who can give you advice as well, not just those who are consultants and experts in their field, but as someone grows with your business, they can give you feedback on how they see things are going as well, and they can be a really valuable asset. And although they don't need to necessarily start as employees, please make sure you check out the employee versus contractor tool on the ATO website. It was something, Ingrid, I was hammering Senator Michaelia Cash about, and I will continue to hammer her about that if she remains in that portfolio, which is just understanding what that relationship is. And a lot of people who start out in business just go, oh, I'll just get contractors and I'll pay them. But sometimes the relationship is stipulated differently in terms of tax law, and you need to make sure you're doing it correctly from the beginning. So there's lots of great tools out there. The ATO website has a great small business newsroom, which you should subscribe to. They have top tips coming out all the time. You could sit there for 3 weeks and watch videos on how to start a business. There's fantastic resources there, so I highly recommend it to people.
And I highly recommend calling the ATO if you have questions. I mean, they're there to help. And honestly, if ever you find yourself on the wrong side of something to do with the ATO, fess up quickly, put your hand up, say, I seem to have got this wrong, maybe I haven't quite got it right, do the right thing, and they're not out to put everybody in jail.
That's right. We've got the ATO coming on the show in the next couple of weeks, and that is one of the main things that they like to say is, it's not in our interest to put people out of business. We don't get people to pay tax by putting them out of business. So let's have a look at, as well as, we've talked about who to surround yourselves with and what might be the impetus to starting a business. What about the where? So we've talked about the numbers a little bit. What about the where? Where do you start knowing where to work? I mean, let's look at this area of Sydney on the Upper North Shore. There's nothing. There's nowhere. There's no co-working spaces. Am I going to have to pack myself up and schlep down to the city to get into, a co-working space? Or what are the alternatives?
Yeah, well, I guess it depends on the business. If you're setting up a home bookkeeping service, for example, you actually need to have your computer, possibly not a laptop, but a proper computer. So you probably need to be either in your own office or sharing an office. What I've noticed happen, I'm in the inner west, so we've got a little bit more growth in some of these sorts of things, is that offices where there is a spare desk or some spare space are opening that up to someone to take on a casual basis or a more permanent basis. So say maybe a law firm that has 2 spare desks or has a spare office in their room, an accounting office or some other, or maybe a real estate office that has spare space, they're starting to open those up for having somebody else come in and use them. Now,
and your local Chamber of Commerce might be a great way to meet those sort of people who know people. And again, the consultants that you talk to and you work with, they might know someone, because really, like you said, all you need is a desk and an internet connection.
And I work from home sometimes, but I have to say it's actually really great to get out, because there's a lot of distractions at home. I mean, you might do away with the 40 minutes travel time and the having to, get dressed and get into the office. But, the productivity for the 5 or 6 hours you might be there could be significantly better than the productivity of staying at home, even though you haven't had to spend the time travelling and getting ready. So it's really a payoff to that. Now, if you're a business that needs commercial space, I'm always really cautious, or helping people to be really cautious about signing up for commercial leases. Some of them can be 3 or 5 year commitments. They can be 5 plus 5s or even more than that. So, if you are, particularly the fitness industry, some of the health professionals, if you're a physiotherapist, you need somewhere. If you're a dentist, you need to set up, and it's probably $500,000 to set up on top of your commercial lease. So you want to make sure that your business is going to offer something that's different, that you're going to be able to carve out a niche, that you're going to be able to provide a service. Always super important to look at your competitors. So certainly if you're taking a commercial lease, and don't trust the real estate agents to give you the advice. I had a fabulous client on the Northern Beaches, and she was looking at having a space to run a Pilates studio, and she said, I'd like it to be subject to the council permission. And the real estate said, you'll be fine. And when she did, she found out she actually couldn't do Pilates at 6 o'clock in the morning, that there was no noise till 9. So that would mean that she couldn't play music and she couldn't have traffic. So, if you think about most fitness businesses, they've got something happening in the mornings. So whatever your business is, making sure that you're going to be able to do under the council. And if you're working from home, you might need to check with the council to make sure that you've got your licence to do that, and that your insurance is covered if you've got anybody delivering things to your home. Just make sure that you've got the correct insurances for that.
And councils are normally very supportive of that. They have very clear regulations on what can and can't be done, and it does change from council to council. So if you're moving your business or even moving your home and you work from home, just double check. So some councils are more flexible than others, particularly around the restrictions of people coming and going. That's usually around what the regulations are. So let's talk about thinking in a preventative way now. So what do you mean by that? What is it is it because people should be more cautious? Is this why the ATO is pulling back on the number of ABNs they're issuing. Why should people be cautious when they take those first steps and think about setting up a business?
Well, I think we've talked a little bit about this already, about sort of making sure that people understand what their personal finance need is and that they're going to be able to cover that in their business. And, the Suncorp report last year talked about 25% of small businesses had not paid themselves any money, hadn't paid the owners any money. And the other thing that I think the ATO might be interested in is that they're not paying themselves superannuation either. And, as women, we see the stats, already women have taken time out of the workforce or perhaps haven't earned as much in their careers. And so already when we get to 50, 60, 70, the amount of money in superannuation is not enough to live on. We're seeing a group of 50-plus women who come out of the workforce and don't have the superannuation to support them. And so, if you're in a business in your 20s and 30s, if you're in a job, it's peak ability to put money into superannuation. If you're in a business and you're not paying yourself and you're not paying into superannuation, that's 30 years of, that accrued, built on itself superannuation that's not there. And so I'm really curious how that's going to play out in 20 or 30 years' time.
The way that you can do that perhaps is as you do your BAS each quarter, have a look at your profit and loss just for that quarter and look at your net profit and pay yourself 10% of that. Simple as that. And because you're doing it incrementally, you've already got that BAS bill. Think of yourself as saying, well, I've got the BAS bill and I've got a super bill and I've got to pay that to myself. Obviously, you have to pay it first and foremost to your employees. It's an interesting discussion around single touch payroll at the moment. It's not an option, everyone. You have to do it. You have to do it as of the 1st of July, and you can opt in early now. So you've got to do that to make sure that you're keeping up with your employee regulations. But keep up with your own regulations. Like you said, you're going to end up with this. Before you know it, 5 years will be gone, and that's 5 years of lost super. So if you're not thinking about, if you say, oh, it's just I'm earning some money because my business is turning a profit, well, that's your money and you should be treating that as a wage. And
in fact, very early days, because I got into working with small businesses through bookkeeping because I had been an accountant, and when I left the corporate world, somebody asked me to come and help them with their bookkeeping, which then led to helping other people with their accounts and understanding their accounts. And one of the businesses that I worked for, the two owners of that, all their wages were sent straight to super. They did a salary sacrifice arrangement where they continued to live on the partner's wage. That paid the mortgage, paid the running costs of the house, and everything they were earning in their business went straight into super. So, if people can do something like that, it might be nice to be able to feel like you're paying yourself, but it's fantastic to be able to put money into super because in the long term, whether you believe in super or not, and whether you believe
it's not a religion. You don't believe in it. You just put money aside for when you're not earning money.
Well, and I heard you talking about an investment in property seminar that's coming up there. And there's a lot of people believe that is a better option than super. Well, whatever your belief is, money has to go somewhere.
Exactly,
and
for the future.
Super's there for a reason.
We're going to take a quick break here on Triple H 100.1 FM. You're listening to live to Small Biz Matters with Alexi Boyd. We'll be back after this. And welcome back to Triple H 100.1 FM. You're listening to Small Biz Matters with Alexi Boyd. If you've missed any of today's show, you can catch up via iTunes. There are over 70 podcasts to listen to, just like this fantastic topic all about how to start your own business. Plus, on our website, smallbizmatters.com.au, you've got over 130 podcasts to choose from. If you're interested in becoming a media partner and sharing all this fantastic content, get in touch with me, Alexi, 0424 568 712. And there's lots of great ways that you can be involved, of course, in your local community radio station. So make sure you have a listen to that as well. So we're in the studio today and we're talking to Ingrid Thompson all about her book, So You Want to Start a Business. And just before the break, did I get that right?
Yep.
Yeah. I wasn't looking at the screen when I said it. And just before the break, we were talking about the importance of surrounding yourself with good people, making sure that consultants that you have are, I guess, in your field. That's something else that we didn't touch on, is it's important that they understand what you do and maybe they come recommended. And also think about the people who you might like to use and abuse as a mentor, but just tap into that as a resource and become a mentor yourself. There's no reason why you can't go on this journey with someone else and you can hold each other's hands and talk about your successes and failures. But I guess one of the realistic points here is to realise that there are failures, and it's think of this as a preventative thing as well. This might not be ideal for you and your business, and your business might not work. Like you were saying before about where you establish yourself physically with the where of your business. Probably not a good idea if you're a chiropractor to be set up next to another chiropractor, for example, which does happen. So let's talk about the 7 steps for starting a business. You and I both like practical strategies. So let's talk about the step-by-step process in your mind.
Well, and I think what's great about my book, if you don't mind me shamelessly plugging that, is that
that's why you're here. But also, importantly, like I said at the beginning of the program, I love authors because they know their topic in depth and they're real experts.
So the joy of the 7 steps is that they don't necessarily have to be step 1, step 2. I just call them that because it's how it works. You could dip in anywhere. So a client came to me recently and she's all over the compliance and the financials. She doesn't need much help with that. But she hadn't thought a lot about chapter 1, who are you? She hadn't really thought a lot about her idea, and she hadn't thought a lot about her clients, which is chapter 3. So, there's, even if somebody has a knowledge of some of it, there's something in the book pretty much for everybody. And just on that, I have a podcast with the same name, and I'm reading chapters of the book on the podcast. So if somebody wants to listen to me, because, maybe you like to listen instead of reading, and there's workbooks and activities, worksheets to go with most of the things. There's a whole workbook that goes with the book.
Oh, that's awesome.
So back to the 7 steps. Who are you to start a business? And we've talked a lot about that already. Getting your personal finances in order, getting your business mindset, who do you surround yourself with? And one of the things that I heard recently was, if someone's in your circle, they may not necessarily be in your corner.
Ooh.
And that's, it's really important. You want people in your corner, people to support you. So not to say dump everybody who's in your circle that's not in your corner, but it's just something to think about. I know it's one of those kind of things that people say, but it's important.
One thing on that, you might not necessarily talk about your business with certain people who you don't feel are going to be giving you either the right sort of advice, and there's nothing wrong with critical advice.
Absolutely.
But they might literally be just completely disinterested in what you do, so that's not a good person to talk to about that. Talk to them about other stuff.
Exactly. And the other thing about the people who love us the most is that they're probably going to tell us that everything we think is a great idea, and they're not critical either, like in terms of, because they don't want to hurt our feelings or they want us to feel good about what we're doing. So just really being aware of how people are saying things. And one of the other things about, and this is the last thing I'm going to say about who are you to start a business, is stop looking at what everyone else is doing. People look at Facebook and they see the success of that. They forget it started with a few people in one classroom. I was just talking to somebody yesterday who's got a fantastic idea for a clothes sharing business. And she said, but how do I scale it? It's like, make it work first. Really talk to the people that you're working with. If you go back and read Airbnb's story, they worked with a few homes to get that really right. And the model they have now is not what they had when they first started out. So stop looking at somebody else's, what I call a celebrity reel, because they're only showing you the fantastic bits. Every overnight success pretty much takes 10 years to get to. So, just remember all of that. Okay, so let's think about your idea. What is your idea for your business? Is it meeting a need in the market? And so is it something that somebody wants? Like, just because you love it, does it mean that somebody else is going to love it? Now, we see examples of bakeries that start because people can't get good gluten-free bread, or we see examples of food products because there is a limit of that available. So, that's a great example of a need that's not being met. And even if your idea doesn't work the first time, think about the light bulb. There were 1,000 iterations of the light bulb before it actually worked. So, it's not about failure. It's about finding out what's not working and moving on quickly. And that idea of a minimum viable product doesn't mean that it's a low-level product. It just means it's a basic product of what you would be offering. And so Facebook wasn't what it was when it first started. I use that as an example. Apple the same. These beautiful machines that we use now, simple to use. In the early days, Apple was something much different. So really taking your idea and just going out and talking to people, and not would you buy this, but getting people to actually take money out of their pocket and give it to you.
That's the real challenge.
That's the real challenge, because people will say, yes, that sounds like a great idea, but until they actually pay you. So really looking at what is your idea and what is the value it provides to the person who's going to take it from you. And today that's just more and more competitive, because think about yourself. How do you make a decision? How much research do you do? And because we're absolutely flooded with choices today, it makes it much more difficult to make a choice, so people don't.
Plus, there's more people on the planet who are doing the same thing that you're doing.
Yeah. When I started working in this environment of starting a business, there really weren't many people, but now there's a lot of people helping people get started. Whereas, when I first started, it was more people helping people in business. So I saw this as a niche, and now it's, quite a crowded workspace. And then who are your clients? Step 3 is who are your clients? So who is it that you actually want? And when I talk to people, and Alexia, you've probably heard this as well, when you say to someone, who's your clients? Everyone? No. If you were a chiropractor and everybody in Waitara came to you, could you actually look after everybody in Waitara? You couldn't. So it's not everybody. So get that right to start with. But who is your ideal client? And, for somebody who's already in business, that's much, much easier to discern, because you start to look at who is it that comes in regularly and you look forward to them coming, who pays you on time, who refers people to you, who gives you compliments about your service, who comes back regularly for whatever it is that you offer. So, that's your ideal client. And then start to look at the demographics of that. What age group are they? What nationality, what sort of interests do they have? And you'll find that there's something common across all of that. So that's who's your clients. Then step 4 is about your brand, and we know what a big brand is, but a small business can have a fantastic brand. Look at your business brand, Small Biz Matters. I mean, that is a really solid brand. You've got the right logo, you've got colours, you've got fonts. What's the voice of the brand? It's really, what does your brand stand for? And then compliance is what we've talked about previously, about having systems, making sure your insurances are right, making sure that, if you deal with food, making sure you've got all the licenses and things, compliance about tax, making sure your business is registered correctly, if you're a sole trader and an ABN, or if you're going to be a proprietary limited. So that's a bit complex, but it's all covered in the book. And if you just go through step by step, it's all there. And then financials, and we've talked quite a bit about financials. And the last step, sorry, Alexi, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that the financials, of course, is what you were mentioning before about, understanding, reading reports, knowing what reports to run, getting advice on what you need to know. And something else we didn't mention as well, which is seasonality, but as your business grows and develops, understanding where your peaks and troughs are as well.
And paying for things in the peaks. So that, that's when the cash flow is strong. So what can you do with that cash? You either stash it away for the low times, the troughs, or actually, paying those bills. And then really working towards how can you even out that? So what can you do with membership, with subscriptions, with those sorts? And that's not easy for every business to do, but how can you start to even out those peaks and troughs? And that's where retainers come in. If we go back to the florist, if you're regularly supplying flowers to a particular business, then, you're going to be paid $50 from that business, $150 from that business. So okay, so now I've got $2,000 every week because I supply flowers to all of those businesses. Something else around financials is, and I know it gets talked about quite a lot, is what to do about contra. So contra is a way, for those that sort of thinking about it, is I do work for you at a kind of for free, and you do work for me because I need what you have and you do need what I have. And so we do contra. So really important to understand how that could work.
But also understand it
on that. Yeah.
Well, you need to understand it from a legal perspective as well. It's not something that we would want to, I guess, advertise or encourage people to do, simply because neither party are paying tax. And that's the simple fact, is that, if you were earning $100 an hour and some other guy who was doing some work for you was earning $100 an hour, you'd be both paying $30 an hour to the tax office. So these contra arrangements, I think, have to be looked at very carefully, and I wouldn't suggest doing it unless there was a way of ensuring that you were making sure that you're paying tax in the process as well.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say to it, I'm not a fan of it at all, to be honest, is that it doesn't value the business properly, because you're not actually reporting the true value of the revenue of the business. So that if you want to sell it, or if you're going to ask for a loan, or if you're going to apply for a new credit card, or if you're somehow doing a financial transaction where somebody wants to see the true picture of your business, if there's these gaps because you've got this, contra going on here and over there.
Yeah. It doesn't help you in the end.
No, it doesn't help you.
You just support each other's business by giving each other the business, really. I mean, just charge each other. If it's equal, great. Quid pro quo, that's fine as well. But keep it above board and keep it in terms of a reporting mechanism, I guess.
Well, and I can give you an example of where a contra kind of works but doesn't really work. So there's a local fitness business gets a contra from the florist. The florist has the fitness session and the fitness session gets the bunch of flowers for their reception desk. If the person doesn't have their fitness session, then there's no flowers. If flowers are expensive, then there's no flowers. So
it all gets started getting very complicated, doesn't it?
So then everybody who comes into the fitness business doesn't get to see any flowers because there are none that week because for whatever reason the florist isn't giving them to them. So, it's just, to me that's messy.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last chapter of your book is pretty important, which is, of course, the sales and the marketing and the sales aspect.
Yeah, and having a real plan for that.
How can you plan for it if you're only just starting out, though? Is it looking at comparative businesses?
It could be looking at comparative businesses. In terms of selling, and so many people have never had experience in selling. So, selling is really helping people to see the value in what you're providing, and it's asking for the sale. And I honestly encourage people, if you've never had any type of experience where you've had to sell, then try and put yourself in a position where you do. Now, I know when we go into the 7-Eleven or we go and they say, would you like that Mars bar or would you like that chocolate, or at McDonald's, whereas would you like fries with that? It just really does help you with understanding how we ask for the sale. And if you aren't good at sales, get some sales training, go and do some courses, listen to some online YouTubes, find how to do selling. And a lot of it's in your wording, a lot of it's in how you position yourself, and it goes back to what is your idea and what is the value that you provide to your clients. So that whole marketing and selling, there's a lot of preparation work can be done with that beforehand, and that is going to change time and time again. 3 years ago when I started writing that book and a year ago when it was published, Instagram was really only starting to be the big thing that it is now, and so we can see how quickly Instagram has just taken over everything. I mean, it is Facebook by another name. It's the same people.
Imagery, yeah.
But it's imagery, and it's incredibly important for some businesses to be on Instagram. But if your audience is more of a LinkedIn audience, or if your audience is more of a local audience and you're better off at the business chamber, then, really thinking about where is your marketing best spent. And all of that can be done as part of preparation.
Well, Ingrid, as I suspected, we have completely run out of time, but let me, could you please explain to people where we can find out more about you and your book, please, to buy it?
Well, the best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. I'm a real fan of LinkedIn. My website is www.healthynumbers.com.au. You can buy the book in Australia from the website directly, and you can buy it online at Booktopia, amazon.com.au. The audio version is available through the podcast, So You Want to Start a Business. And if anybody wants to email me, I answer all my own emails, ingrid@healthynumbers.com.au. Happy to answer any questions you have. We just want to make business successful. I truly think, when someone goes into business, they want to do something for themselves. They want to make a difference. They want to look after their families, and everything we can do. And Alexi, I know I'm not putting words in your mouth, but that's why we, clicked so effectively, is that we just want to make successful businesses. Exactly.
What a great way to round off today's program. Thank you so much for coming on Small Biz Matters with Alexi Boyd. We will see you all next week with another fabulous guest. You've been listening to Triple H 100.1 FM. We will see you next Tuesday.